In the first week of December 2025, something crazy happened across India. Airports in Bengaluru, Delhi, Mumbai, basically every major city turned into scenes of absolute chaos. On December 5th, IndiGo's on-time performance had crashed to below 20%. On that single Friday alone, roughly 1,000 flights were cancelled. This was the worst disruption in IndiGo's 20-year history. But here's what made it a national crisis. IndiGo controls about 60% of India's domestic air travel market. When IndiGo fails, the entire country feels it. So the question I'm trying to answer is this. How did one airline's failure cause nationwide chaos? Was this just terrible planning or was something else going on? And what does it tell us about the state of aviation in India? And in this documentary, I'm investigating what led to this crisis. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And without further ado, let's get into the video. The trigger for this crisis was actually a safety regulation. Something that should have been a good news. Early in 2024, India's aviation regulator, the DGCA, announced new flight duty time limitations. These rules were designed to reduce pilot fatigue and improve safety. And the rules go like this. Pilots now needed longer rest periods between flights, stricter limits on overnight flying, and caps on how many hours they could work in a day. This wasn't even a sudden decision. The DGCA gave airlines about 2 years' notice with the final phase taking effect on November 1st, 2025. The logic behind these rules was straightforward. You don't want a tired pilot flying the aircraft. In aviation, even small mistakes can be fatal. So requiring proper rest isn't just about worker welfare. It's about passenger safety. Other countries have similar regulations. This was India catching up to international standards. Now, by all accounts, IndiGo wasn't ready when November 1st hit. In fact, there were some concerning signs even before the deadline. Reports suggest they had mysteriously stopped hiring pilots in the months before. Some sources claim they even made agreements with competitors not to hire each other's pilots. Whatever the reason might be, when November 1st came, IndiGo simply didn't have enough pilots. Pilots who were already working too much could no longer legally fly the hours IndiGo had scheduled for them. At first, the airline tried to manage by delaying flights, but by early December, the system started falling apart completely. Flights began getting cancelled as crew members timed out, meaning they had hit their legal limit of working hours and had to take the mandatory rest. And the new rules forced a large number of IndiGo pilots to take breaks, and there simply wasn't enough backup to fill the gaps. Here's the thing that made this entire thing terrible for IndiGo. Other airlines handled the same rule in a much better way. Air India hired extra pilots ahead of time. Akasa Air did the same. They would have felt some impact for sure, but nothing close to a breakdown like this. IndiGo runs about 2,200 flights every single day, more than any other airline in India. Government officials were direct in their criticism. The Civil Aviation Ministry publicly stated that other airlines were ready for the change. And this entire crisis was basically a result of IndiGo's mismanagement. Pilot union said the same thing. The Federation of Indian Pilots called IndiGo's attitude careless and irresponsible towards regulations. In fact, warning signs were visible even before December. In November 2025, IndiGo had quietly cancelled over 1,000 flights, many due to crew shortages. That should have already been a red flag. But the airline kept trying to run business as usual even with stricter rules. So that's what triggered the crisis. But to understand why it became a national emergency, we need to look at how dominant IndiGo had become. To understand why IndiGo's failure hit India so hard, you need to know just how dominant this airline has become. IndiGo was founded in 2006, less than 20 years ago. In that time, it went from a startup to controlling over 60% of India's domestic air travel market. They built their success on a reputation for low prices, reliable on-time performance, and aggressive expansion. For many years, IndiGo was the airline people trusted. But another reason for the near monopoly is that so many of their rivals simply disappeared from the picture. The history of Indian aviation over the past 2 decades is basically a graveyard of failed airlines. Kingfisher Airlines, Jet Airways, Go Air, even Air India was in serious trouble until Tata Group bought it in 2022 and later merged it with Vistara and AirAsia. What all this means is by late 2025, Indian Sky was basically dominated by 2 players, IndiGo on one side and Air India on the other. These two controlled roughly 90% of India's domestic passenger traffic. IndiGo alone operates more than half of all domestic flights. That's an almost unheard of market share in any country. And here's a statistic that really shows the problem. Out of 1100 odd domestic flight routes in India, 737 routes only have a single airline operating. And IndiGo is the sole operator on 514 of those routes. On many city pairs, especially smaller cities, IndiGo is literally the only airline flying. If you want to fly from say Guwahati to Lucknow, your choice is IndiGo or nothing. This level of concentration means that if IndiGo stumbles, there are very few to no alternatives that a person can rely on. And that's exactly what happened earlier this month. IndiGo's dominance grew partly because they were well run in their early years, but they also benefited massively whenever a competitor failed. When Jet Airways and Kingfisher went down, IndiGo grabbed a chunk of their routes and airport slots. Over time, as one airline after another failed, IndiGo became the last one standing in many markets. By end of 2025, it wasn't uncommon for travelers in smaller cities to have only IndiGo as a realistic option. This monopoly in skies is what turned an operational failure into a national crisis. Ticket prices on other airlines shot up nearly 10 times the usual price because IndiGo wasn't there to keep them in check. Industry experts are now pointing out on the fact that India needs more airlines, one with 4 or 5 healthy competitors. When one airline controls most of the travel, its problems aren't just its own, they become a national problem. Which brings us to a controversial question about the crisis itself. Whenever a crisis this big happens, people naturally ask, could it have been prevented, or more provocatively, was it allowed to happen on purpose? In IndiGo's case, there's a controversial theory making the rounds, that the airline's management may have used this chaos as leverage to force the regulator to relax the pilot rules. And here's why this theory exists. As IndiGo's cancellation piled up in early December, the government moved quickly to give airlines some relief. Within a few days, the DGCA put a temporary suspension on FTTL rules, especially for IndiGo. Basically, it granted IndiGo an exemption until February 2026. This was done to help IndiGo stabilize its operations and get flights back in the air. But to many observers, it looked like IndiGo's operational failure had somehow pushed the regulators into rolling back the safety regulation. The whole point of the new FTTL rule was to protect against exhausted pilots flying planes. And now those rules are being partially postponed because one airline couldn't comply. The Pilot Association of India publicly protested, saying that safety norms exist to safeguard human life and it shouldn't be compromised. Now, adding fuel to this speculation was an open letter that surfaced online. The letter claimed that the chaos was not just an operational failure, it was a failure of planning and frontline protection. IndiGo CEO Peter Elbers issued a public apology and took responsibility for failing to plan properly.
I, on behalf of all of us at IndiGo, would like to extend our sincerest apologies for the major inconvenience this has caused to many of our customers.
So was it a dirty trick or just a huge blunder? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. The DGCA has launched a full investigation into IndiGo's conduct and is demanding answers from airlines management. Regardless of the intent, the crisis revealed a troubling dynamic. IndiGo's market power translated into bargaining power. That raises an uncomfortable question. Have we created a situation where a private company can effectively pressure regulators simply by being too essential to fail? But beyond all the regulations and corporate drama, there's another side to the story that matters just as much, the human one.
आपका स्टाफ उस कियोस्क को मेंटेन करने के लिए काबिल नहीं है।
It's your responsibility.
Beyond the statistics and policy debates, the IndiGo crisis was at its core a human story. For thousands of passengers, these weren't just flight cancellations. They were ruined plans, shattered expectations, and moments stolen away by a logistical disaster. A woman at Guwahati airport was traveling with her husband's coffin. When that IndiGo flight was suddenly cancelled, she was left in the terminal with the coffin. Then there's the story of a newlywed couple from Bhubaneswar who couldn't attend their own wedding reception. And there were countless other nightmares. Airport terminals turned into makeshift shelters. In Delhi and Mumbai, entire families camped out on floor. Parents ran out of diapers and baby food for their infants. Elderly travelers missed doses of medications. Stalls ran out of food, leaving people hungry and nowhere to go. At one point in Delhi, a father was asking for sanitary napkins for his daughter who had started her period. Meanwhile, alternate options had become ridiculously expensive. Tickets that normally cost 5,000 rupees were selling for 50,000 rupees at some point. It was as if these flights saw the gap to loot money from people stuck at airports. The suffering that people went through is why this crisis hit so hard. It wasn't just about one airline failing. It was about thousands of individual lives disrupted. The regulators know that IndiGo Airlines is essential. It's too big to fail. And if IndiGo collapses again, the whole country will pay the price. December 2025 is a wake-up call. Trust in aviation can take years to build and seconds to break. And India simply cannot afford another crisis like this.